everybody, it's Romania Black, and I at this point, I might as well just start watching ahead, shouldn't I? The roller coaster of Monster has begun, and I have a feeling that I'm just going to need to just keep steadily, watching ahead a little bit so that I can avoid spoilers and so that I can stay on top of the roller coaster and the ride, because episodes 29 and 30 have been two of the best episodes in the series so far, and we're not even halfway into the series, right? We're not even halfway, but they've been so freaking good. And again, y'all that were watching this through Netflix got to this last episode and had to wait. That is the most torturous thing Netflix has done in ages. It's like it's as torturous as their original live action anime movies. But yeah, oh my god, I love Reichwein. His characters come out of nowhere. He's filled the Richard shape hole in my heart that was left when Richard died. Someone with episode 29 asked on YouTube if I thought that Richard killed himself or if Johan killed him. Well, I think with last episode we kind of confirmed that no, I don't believe he killed himself. I believe that Johan killed him because he made the whole argument about hating that specific brand of whiskey. And even if they are at your most poignant point and your most bottom of bottoms, people still got tastes. So I fully believe that Johan definitely killed him. That's my personal belief. Now, do we have proof of that? No. So we can't say for sure, but everything lines up far too conveniently. I don't know. But again, that's kind of the argument of Monster, is that things line up pretty conveniently to frame Tenma. That's kind of Lunge's whole thing. So are we as the audience slowly becoming Lunge in thinking that Johan is the center of all this when maybe he's not? Who knows? This entire series is playing a psychological game, but I would argue the stuff with Jurgens, the stuff we saw with Junkers, and Johan specifically killing him in front of Tenma, and then everything with this whole Richard deal, I think lends us to believe that, yeah, Johan has a monster in him, or is a monster, and is definitely doing these things. But the fact that Junkers is the only one we've outright seen does beg for some doubt. So, and that's kind of the crazy thing, is if there's a shred of doubt, can you be certain? So it's fascinating, but Reichwein in the last episode, I fell in love with his character. I loved him beating those thugs up. And then Tenma, finally, after how many episodes without Tenma, it feels like an eon. He shows back up and is helping Reichwein to escape from Ricardo. Oh my gosh. So my hope is, as we go into this episode, my hope is that Tenma can talk with Reichwein, get caught up, brought up to speed on this whole deal with Carl and Richard and Johan and Schubert, and figure out, okay, where do we go to from here? What do we try to solve more? Because, I think if they keep pursuing the Richard case, then they're just going to get caught up even further with Ricardo. So I'm like, do they try to tell Carl that Schubert might be in danger? They try to find out what Johan is doing with Schubert. Why does he want to be his personal secretary or treasurer? Does he just want his money for his own agenda? What do we do with this? Is Tenma even going to care about any of this and is just going to go after Johan? We don't know. So that's the crazy thing about all this, is that we just don't know what's going to happen. And at this point, I don't know if I can stop. I was like, oh, I'll wait and get some comments in. And now I'm like, no. I think I just need to keep watching to try to get far enough ahead that if somebody brings up a spoilery comment on accident, it doesn't make me mad or upset. So I'm like, So yeah, I'm really excited, y'all, to see what's going to happen. I hope you all are too. But real quick, wanted to give a shout out to those over on Patreon. I have 3 tiers. If you want to talk about this show and share, the whole Discord just shares fan art of Johan. It's just constantly teasing me. They're just like, isn't Johan pretty? And I'm like, in the middle of my despair, being like, why are you sharing pictures of him? Yes, he is pretty, but so there's just been tons of Johan fan art thrown out everywhere. They abandoned Tenma long ago. So there, for $1, you can get on the Discord and talk about monsters, spoiler tag to your heart's content. For $5, you can see next week's episode over on Patreon and watch me freak out even more. And then these special individuals are part of the philanthropy tier, and they just help me in so many ways. They wanted me to start this tier to give extra support each month, and I am insanely grateful. So for these individuals, you all help me pay for the streaming services to host this, to pay for manga and anime that I react to, and to help pay my taxes, because I do have to pay taxes now on this. So you know how you do. But a special shout out to Edgar, to Tyrone, to Larry Manning, aka Nameless Monster, to Dana, to Be Happy, to Shimoyama, to Eric, to Sunspots, to Translucent Men, and Alex Cornejo. Thank you all so much. You all are amazing. I greatly appreciate your support, and you help me do the things that I do. So, all of my love. But yeah, and special thanks to Anthony, who's been giving me these files for Monster. I eventually will go back and watch the Netflix version, the inferior version, and see what all they've changed there on my own time. But I appreciate Anthony, you giving me these files. They've been very helpful because, unlike Netflix or any other streaming service, these are just labeled Monster 31. And so there's no title, there's no nothing, there's no thumbnail. It's just a file, and I open it up and react to it blindly. And so that's been the best experience of this medium so far. So thank you. All of my love to all of you. But we're not going to waste any more time. I've talked enough. We're going to start episode 31 of Monster and just, you know, see what happens. So how do we pick up from that cliffhanger? We're going to find out here in 3, 2, 1, and let's do this, y'all. Don't mind me, just really nervous for Tenma. Oh my god. Yeah, wow. Tenma's attitude in this episode was not at all what I was expecting, but after watching the episode, I'm not surprised. Because at this point, like, I don't know what I was expecting. I guess I was expecting Tenma to be like, as this series goes on, Tenma gets further and further emotionally detached, which is because of this whole idea that he's going to have to kill someone, that he thinks in his mind the only way to stop Johan is to kill him. And it seems like it's something that goes against Tenma's principles, and it has gone against what he said those principles were since day one. And so obviously the idea that he's trying to steel himself to where he can do this action, the more and more he's trying to get the resolve to do it, the worse and worse it's making him feel, and the more emotionally distant he's becoming, right? Which is in stark contrast to Johan, who seems like he gets more and more engaging when he gets more into the setup, right? So they kind of, Johan and Tenma kind of are coming at it from different ways, right? But this episode had so much in it. There was so much setup, so much stuff. I had to bring my word to it out because I'm like, I want to kind of detail it. But I feel so bad for Tenma because I'm like, Tenma, like Reichwein says, you're not alone. And the thing of it is Tenma, as my dogs are very upset that I'm not playing with them and I'm paying more attention to Whiteboard Coon and you all, and they'll just have to deal with it. The thing about it is that Tenma so far is very traumatized by what Johan has gotten away with, because Johan's gotten away with pretty much everything, right? He's been able to outmaneuver the police, or he's bought the police, or he's had people kill the police. Like, Johan has been able to skirt away scot-free this entire series, and I think Tenma rightfully is fearful of all of those involved. And so I want to bring this up, but the idea that Tenma, he believes the only way to stop Johan is to kill him. And there's some guilt there because, you know, like we've talked about in previous episodes, there's some guilt there because Mina, she did kill him. She shot him in the head. He was going to die. And Tenma brought him back. And so I think there's always going to be that fear of, this is my fault because I brought him back from the brink of death. because I didn't just let him die as maybe it should have happened. Now all of these murders are lining up and they are all partially my fault. Like, so I feel like when Gillen is having the confrontation with Lunge, which we'll talk about, I feel like when Gillen's listing off all the murders that have happened, it suddenly hits you as the audience like, oh wow, yeah, there's been a lot of people die because of Johan. But Tenma's saying it's also because of me. Because I saved him, I have a direct hand in these murders. So it's almost like Tenma saying, I brought you back, now I have to take you out. Which is a very like hand of God thing, which is, this series gets spiritual at times, and it's like, okay, that's pretty crazy, right? So, and Johan is called Tenma a father figure, so it's kind of like a God thing, like I brought you here, now I'm going to take you away sort of situation. There's so many layers to it, right? But he believes the only way to stop him is to kill him, and that he is partially, and I'll put inadvertently responsible for what has happened with him, right? But the thing about it is we're going to put Reichwein, and they spell his name like differently in several episodes, so I'm just going to put Reichwein here. He tells Tenma that he is not alone, that there are others fighting with him. And we see that Tenma has become emotionally detached. And it feels, honestly, a lot like Rosso. It feels a lot like Rosso. And Rosso, with the moment he just said he wanted to order the sniper rifle, I'm like, that's Rosso. That's the whole thing that Nina went through with him, was him explaining that he was an assassin. I was like, oh my God, he's going to be up on the rooftop pointing the gun at Johan, and then is he going to have a moment like Rosso where he can't do it, or is he going to try to shoot him? That's the question. Like, the OP makes it seem like Johan meets Tenma head on with like a pistol, but maybe that's not what happens. Or maybe Tenma backs out, or maybe does Nina show up and stop him? We don't know. Or maybe Lunge's calling the police, so maybe the police are going to stop him. I don't know how that's going to work. But I got Rosso vibes from, I also got Rosso, and then someone pointed out in the comments, which, again, please, as I've noted before, please don't try to steer or put clues or hints out of things to talk about in the episodes, because I don't want it accidentally spoiling me, being like, because someone in the comments said, they're like, oh, you should talk about how Wolf being isolated is similar to Tenma, and I was like, I've talked about it in the episode with Wolf, so I didn't feel like I needed to keep bringing it up. But that also makes me think that that's going to be a plot point later on, so please don't do that. Otherwise, I won't read your comments, but because I don't want to be spoiled. But now that we're here, now that's been brought up, there is a tie to that, that he's becoming emotionally detached like Rosso, and there is a fear of isolation like what happened with Wolf. And what I mean is Tenma is seeing that all of these people are getting involved alongside him. Reichwein, Gillen, Dieter. And Reichwein treats that as a good thing. He's like, we have strength in numbers. You're not alone. It's okay. We can all work together. But Tenma doesn't seem to see it that way. You can tell from the episode that Tenma is worried that more and more people are getting involved because of that conversation with Wolf, where Wolf's like, Johan picked off all the people that I was connected to one by one until I was all alone. And I was just left with my name. And it may not even be my real name. Right? So I think Tenma is afraid that, like Richard, because Richard was connected to all this, but Richard's dead now, the people connected with Johan are slowly dying off, and one by one. And I think Tenma is afraid that Gillen and Reichwein and Dieter are going to be in danger and picked off the more involved they get in trying to prove that it's Johan and not Tenma. At this point, Tenma doesn't even care about if Lunge and them find him. I think that tying to that partially being responsible is that I honestly think that Tenma does not care if he is arrested after Johan dies. I honestly think at this point, which is so sad, is that Tenma has resigned himself. Tenma probably doesn't even feel, he's like, it's my responsibility to take Johan out because I kept him in this world. I've been, inadvertently responsible for these people dying. I honestly think if he kills Johan, as soon as he does, he'll turn himself in and accept whatever consequence happens, right? And the sad thing is, it would be a self-fulfilling prophecy because, like, Dieter's like, I don't want Tenma to become a murderer. That's like all these characters, they don't want Tenma to become a monster like Johan. Like, the whole thing is, Tenma has steeled himself with this resolve that the only way to stop a monster is, and he may not even think that, honestly. Tenma, the thing that seems to be happening is this idea that only a monster can stop a monster. And so Tenma, he has to become a killer to kill a killer. But I don't even know if Tenma realizes that. I don't even think Tenma is thinking about becoming a monster to kill a monster. I think Tenma just thinks, I have to take Johan out as a responsibility to the people that are in danger around him. I don't even think that Tenma is thinking of becoming a monster. I don't think that's even crossed his mind, but it's crossing the mind of those around him. Dieter's like, I don't want Tenma to become a murderer, and neither does Reichwein, neither does Gillen. They're all worried about him because, the only thing keeping Tenma's innocence as a possibility is the fact that he technically has not killed anyone. He hasn't killed anyone, so thus, there's no way that they can truly pin something on him. But if he kills Johan and they find him and confiscate him with this sniper rifle, then that's all the proof Lunge needs. Lunge could just be like, Johan was the next target. And since Johan is tied to Schubert, there's motivation there, right? Because you could easily, Lunge, if he is truly believing, we'll talk about Lunge versus Gillen and how Lunge's mind may have or may have not changed. If he wanted to, you could twist that in so many different ways. You could say, oh, well, Tenma was targeting Johan because he was working for Schubert and Schubert has all this money and Tenma wanted the money. You could find a way to twist it. And as unrealistic as it sounds, you could find a way to twist it. You could make it work and say that, oh, he was targeted because of such and such. Or you could say he was connected to this thing that Tenma is connected to. You could find a way to warp it, right? And humanity has a tendency to find ways to warp things to where they fit a certain agenda, right? Again, we'll talk about Gillen versus Lunge, which is, I did not expect that in this episode. That was wonderful. But if Tenma kills Johan, it will give the police all they need to arrest him and charge him with the other murders because there's no proof otherwise. But they have proof that Tenma's a killer. If they catch him, they have proof that he's killed Johan. I'm so worried. I don't want Tenma to become a murderer either. We've been dogging Johan this whole time because we've seen him connected to these murders and we've been calling him evil and a monster because of it. I don't want Tenma to get lumped in the same boat. And I feel like, God, I want Nina to come in there at some point and say, Tenma, please stop. I talked to a man who went down the same path as you. It's not worth it. Like, I need Nina to come in and convince him otherwise. And maybe she'll show up at the last minute, like as a Deus Ex Machina for Johan. Who knows? But in broad daylight, we go through this episode. So what I really like about it is the white sausage here is great. I don't know. It doesn't look great, but maybe it is. Dieter stays quiet this whole conversation, but Dieter's not dumb. Dieter is observing and paying attention to this whole conversation, but there's not anything really for Dieter to contribute other than he knew Stefan. He knew the boy from the orphanage. But yeah, Tenma is detached this entire conversation with Reichwein and is probably only thinking about what has Johan been doing? Why didn't I get here sooner? Why haven't I stopped him? Look at all who's gotten involved. This man's gotten involved. Rudy's gotten involved. And he didn't answer Rudy's, classified ad because he doesn't want Rudy to get involved and get killed. He likes Rudy. And he doesn't want this guy to get killed either. But he was wanting to talk to Richard and found out that now he's dead. So it's just, Tenma is so devastated and emotionally detached because he's trying to get the resolve to kill Johan. But you just know that's not what he wants to do. And And Reichwein tries to like reach out to him and be like, you're not alone. It's okay. Like, you can feel safe. I like the fact that Reichwein took them to a restaurant where only regulars come, that it's a very selective restaurant. I find that interesting. There's a little part of me that feels that exclusion. It reminds me of the Turkish district just a little bit, that like only certain people can go here, but not others. And the only reason Dieter and Tenma are welcome is because of Reichwein. And I think the only reason that Reichwein, his request is accepted by the owner, because the owner seems kind of brash. The owner seems kind of rude. Like he's like, I don't really want your kind here. You know, he just has that vibe to him. Now, that's just my opinion. He just has that kind of like vibe. And I think the only reason he helps Reichwein is because I think he's seen Reichwein like for counseling. And so he feels like he owes Reichwein, kind of like Braun. So I feel like Reichwein kind of takes advantage of that relationship, and he's like, oh, you can give my friend a room, right? And he's like, well, there's rats, but I guess it'll work. Like, he's not hospitable at all. And Reichwein says he's a good guy underneath, but I got that vibe of like, I'm only helping you because I owe Reichwein a favor, and that's the only reason. But I do appreciate that it gives him a safe spot, right? I only have people like you here. Because I only have people like you here, business does not improve. Like, he's pretty rude and crass. But I like that Reichwein is he's very easy to work with. He's like, oh, thanks, Otto. And he just like, he doesn't even give him a thumbs up back. He's just like, eh. And Tenma looks like just his face is darkened, right? Like, Tenma does not want to involve all of these people in this. And yet they're getting more involved. And I think Tenma gets more and more worried that he doesn't want to be responsible for anything happening to them as well. But yeah, I like Reichwein's character an awful lot. Like, he's just so easy to work with. It seems like, I feel like Reichwein figures out all too late what Tenma's been planning. I'm like, dude, did it just now hit you? And Richard was trying to get him to read Tenma back in one of his counseling sessions, right? And Reichwein kind of blew him off back then, being like, oh, well, I'd have to see him face to face to read him. And here he is face to face. So the fact that Reichwein does not instantly put together that Tenma is planning to do something awful, I think it's telling for the poker face that Tenma has, but also that Reichwein was maybe in denial himself, being like, oh, it'll be fine, you're okay. And it's like, no, Tenma is not fine. He's not okay. He's actually in a pretty dark place right now. He says there's a good, and I think what Reichwein says about Otto is important here. He says he may seem a bit unsociable, but he's got a good side to him too. That complicates so many things as well, as far as the theme in the story, where he talks about how people have a good side too. That's what complicates this entire thing, is that Johan, for all we've seen of him so far in this series, yeah, he's a murderer. I'm sure Johan is a straight up killer. He is a murderer. He's a manipulator. But what makes it so complicated is that there is perhaps a good side to him too. Like, he talks about the Children's Bill of Rights. He talks about wanting to help protect people. He clearly has a very messed up past, especially with Kinderheim. So there's a place of understanding of why he is the way that he is. There's a nature and nurture thing at war right now with us, the audience, and his character. But if he has a good side to him too, then what Reichwein is suggesting about Otto in this moment with Tenma is that we can't judge him and we can't deem him as irredeemable, because there's some goodness in him too, even though he's rough around the edges. If we can apply that everybody has a good side to them too, then what do we do with that? So that it just makes the conversation even more complicated. And they don't want Tenma to become a murderer, because often we as a society, we only focus on the negatives of people and not on the positives of them. And so, granted, I am not excusing Johan for murder. I am still very upset that he is responsible for Richard's death. But it makes it more complicated when your antagonist in a show is not just an outright vaudeville villain, right? Because in so many series, the villain is like just evil and has no compassion or any good side to them at all. They're just horrible people. And Johan is complicated and complex with everything we've seen surrounding him. And Tenma is trying his hardest to get the resolve to kill Johan. He's trying to pencil Johan as just this character. He only has bad, and so he must go. And that's like the only way he's convincing himself to do it. And we're seeing him in broad daylight, and so now I'm wondering, is some of Johan's actions going to cause Tenma to hesitate? What are we going to do with that? But yeah, I thought that was a really good line for Reichwein to bring up. And then he's like, if you hadn't saved me, I'd be in the morgue. Go ahead and eat. I'm like, Reichwein takes nearly dying really well. I was like, dude, you were nearly killed, and you handle this the best way possible. He's sitting there eating sausage being like, well, I was nearly killed in my own office, but just a regular Tuesday. Like, I'm amazed at how calmly and jovially Reichwein is handling near death. Maybe he's been in the jaws of death before, and so he's just used to it, and maybe his line of work, he's like, oh, I've nearly been killed like 3 times. It's fine. Tenma handles this on a much more deeply emotional scale. Like, Tenma is very shaken by this whole thing of nearly losing multiple people because of Johan and himself. So it's kind of fascinating. Like, it just, Tenma is taking this not well, and Reichwein over here is just like, well, I'm alive, so YOLO. He's trying to pass it off, and maybe he feels nervous. He's just doing it for Tenma's sake. He's like, I'm just glad I can eat all this food. And then he asks why he hasn't contacted Rudy. And Tenma's like, I didn't want to get him involved. And that's when Reichwein says that the thing we need most right now are friends. We need the most. He's like, being alone is not a good deal. If you are alone, you are easily... That's the thing. Richard was alone through all of this. Richard was trying to solve the case by himself, trying to do everything, and it didn't work out because he didn't tell enough people in time. He luckily did right before the end, and that's why Gillen and Reichwein are in on it. But Richard was trying to do everything by himself, and it ended up getting him killed. Because Johan's not doing everything by himself. That's the thing. Tenma's trying to take Johan out all alone because he doesn't want to involve people. Johan has friends. He has people working for him. He has Ricardo. He has connections like with Baby and all the others and people that kind of worship him and follow him. He's not alone. He maybe is the mastermind in the shadows pulling the strings on everything by himself, but he is not committing the murders alone. He's had people helping him, people get things set up for him. Ricardo's been doing a lot of the grunt work. Like, Johan has not been acting by himself. He has involved many people over the course of this series so far. And so it's interesting that Tenma wants to isolate and try to take Johan out by himself when Johan is like, why would I do this all by myself? It takes a village, So I think that I don't think Tenma's getting that, and that's so crazy. And he's like the whole thing with Richard. He's like, Dieter saw Stefan Jews in here, or Hughes, or however you want to pronounce the name, and recognized him from Kinderheim, the orphanage that Dieter's foster parent was originally a teacher there. Yeah, everything's connected in this story, right? So I'm sure Dieter saw the picture of Stefan in his foster father's house, and that's when he was like, oh yeah, he saw him in Hart's house and was like, I know that guy. He was from Kinderheim. And Tim was just like, well, great. Everything's all connected in this, right? And that's the other thing, too. Tenma probably has in his mind that once you get connected to Johan, you're going to be in danger. Like, knowing that Eva was nearly killed by being connected with Ricardo, knowing that Richard is dead now, knowing all these other people have probably died. Like, it's weighing on Tenma heavily, right? And he's like, I saw you in front of Richard's grave. And Reichwein's like, look, you've been doing this all by yourself, and that's admirable, but you're not alone now. Like, let us help you. Let us help you take down Johan. And I wish that somebody would tell Tenma that Johan's not doing this on his own. And then he says, we'll prove your innocence. And at that point, I think Tenma is just like, I'm not going to be innocent by the end of this. He's like, I appreciate you trying to help prove my innocence, but I'm about to kill a man, and then I won't be innocent anymore. So it's kind of a moot point. He's like, I don't want to drag you into something that is moot. And I'm just like, but you don't have to kill him. It's so weird. It's so weird, right? Where it's like, we don't want Johan to keep killing people. We want Johan to get caught. But I can't be a hypocrite and say I want Johan to die, and in the same breath say I don't want Tenma to become a murderer, right? So you're kind of stuck in a corner. You're like, you can't say that you want Johan to die for his crimes, and in the same breath say you don't want Tenma to become a murderer. It's because those things, they have to equate, right? So I'm like, I just want Johan to be caught. My biggest thing in this whole story so far is, I mean, obviously, I want Johan to stop killing people. Obviously. But I think, honestly, my biggest goal in this whole series is I want Lunge to realize that Tenma was and is innocent and that it's been Johan. I want Lunge to realize it's Johan. Because at this point, the most frustrating thing for me is that Lunge's like, well, that was cool, but no. Like, no, it's right there in front of you. But we'll talk about Lunge because I have a point where I can kind of relate to Lunge, and we'll talk about it then. The fact that Reichwein doesn't have the photo. Here's the thing that is frustrating, right? The photos are gone. Like Johan. So he has lost the photo of Johan. And I'm sure Ricardo destroyed it. I am pretty sure that Ricardo destroyed it. Now, we're going to put Lunge up here. Lunge took Rudy's picture of Johan. I'm like, I hope to God you made copies, because clearly you made a copy from the one that Reichwein had. So please make I hope you made copies. I hope you did, because I'm like, if you gave Lunge the only picture that you had of him, I'm fully expecting Lunge to just take a lighter and be like, who's this? Just toss it away, right? I'm fully expecting Lunge to just deny Johan's existence completely because of reasons we'll talk about. And so, yeah, the man's name was Hesse, but it turns out that there was no man. And so Tim was like, if he's close, that means we're going to meet Johan at some point. Yep. In broad daylight. So we have Talbach and Schubert AG associates, right? We don't know who Talbach is. Talbach was mentioned this, and they're like business partners. We've never met Talbach, so I don't know if he's going to become relevant in this series at all. I'm not sure. The company was the center of Schubert's financial world, and then Schubert started showing up again, right? Once a certain boy became his assistant. Surprise, surprise. The scene where Johan comes out into the daylight is so fascinating because that's when Tenma sees him for the first time. Oh my God. And Tenma's like, oh man. Because that's the thing. Like, so far in this series, Tenma's only ever seen Johan in the shadows, right? And it's just like he's seen a ghost. Like this little boy that he saved is this murderer that's standing right before him in broad daylight. And it makes it so much more real. I feel like whenever Johan was in the shadows in the earlier episodes, it almost made you question. Like I was questioning with Lunge whether or not Johan was real, whether or not he was actually there. But he's there, so people are seeing him. So now it's reality that he does exist. He is actually here influencing people's lives. And Tenma, like, clearly just he's just so distant. He's like, there's no doubt that's him. And he's like, it's the first time seeing him in broad daylight. It has to be now. Yeah, and I like the little subtle symbolism of him saying it has to be now, like I have to kill him now that I know he's real, is all in the shadows of that moment. Like when they're in the car and it's before they turn to leave and the car gets basked in the sunlight, you see Tenma in the shadows being like, yeah, I gotta kill him. Now I have no doubt. It has to happen. It's like, and he's like, we'll clear your name soon. One thing I love about the 90s and this show being based in it is that technology, you have to wonder, like, how would technology change the way that things happened in this series? Because with, like, the modern technology and phones and everything, I feel like it would be this story would be quite different. It would be Johan's actions would have to be a lot more sophisticated, perhaps, because of how much easier it would be for technology to track him and provide evidence against him. But here, we're in the 90s, where there's not a lot of internet. There's not a lot of things digitally stored. So most of them are still print copies, paper copies. Unless you make copies, if the originals are destroyed, you've lost the evidence. That's kind of the scariest thing about technology during this time period, is if you didn't back your shit up and have it in multiple locations with multiple copies and you lost it, it's lost. You can't replicate it. There's not a backup disk or a cloud drive you got it saved on. So that's so fascinating. I was trying to see, like, we have Wilhelm Wenders, Werner Herzog. I wonder if they're just like famous people that are included on here. We have Natasja A. Kinski, Wolfgang Becker, Bruno Gans. I wonder if they're if they're famous people. Y'all have to comment down below if there's any relevance to those names that Braun is in the center of. I'm glad that Reichwein brought that home too, to investigate Braun. He's like, I found Dr. Kemma a key witness. There's got to be someone that's seen Richard at the time of his death. I like that Reichwein is like trying to connect back to Richard and give him little updates on what's happening, because he feels like part of this case is, he talks about Richard getting his revenge, which I want to go back to that. He talks about that. He says, he's like, if we could find the prostitute, we could prove it. Or the people who said they were Johan's parents. And I'm thinking the same thing Tenma's probably thinking. He's probably thinking, well, they are dead by now because Johan's trying to cover his tracks. I'm sure the prostitute's dead because Ricardo was with them. I'm sure the foster parents are dead. I'm sure that anybody tied to him, with the exception of Carl and Schubert, are dead because Carl and Schubert are too high profile to get rid of yet. They are actually acting as Johan's shield, which is so ingenious, because now Johan has something in to protect him in this moment. If Tenma had just came to Johan at Munich University without Schubert or Carl there, I think it would be so much easier for him to get Johan alone and arrested. Because Johan wouldn't be tied to anybody. He could just be like, hey, I want to talk to you, and then like find some way. Or it could be easier to kill him because he'd be all by himself. But now Johan has Carl and Schubert as a shield. He's like always with them. There's always security there. So it's not easy to just walk up and kill him. There's guards and stuff that are protecting him inadvertently because they're protecting Schubert. So genius move by Johan. Genius move. It's almost like he just was protecting him knowing it was coming. We've got Johan right where we want him. And it's like, but it's not going to be easy. No, it's not going to be easy to track him at all. And Tenma is just worried. He says, when I look at you, you remind me of Richard. You're fighting for all the justice in the world, but you're not alone. Again, Reichwein's trying to be like, I know you're trying to be like Richard. You're trying to like be all for justice and do this. But the thing of it is, I think Tenma, what he can't admit is that it's not for justice, but for his own personal peace. I think what Tenma doesn't want to admit at this point in the series is that he's no longer doing it just for justice. I think that he could say he's doing it to protect the world from Johan. He could say he's doing it to protect the people he cares about from Johan. I think he could say that. But at the end of the day, is Tenma actually doing this for those reasons? Or is he doing this to clear his own conscience? To say, I kept this man alive, it's my fault, and I'm taking responsibility for it. Right? And Reichwein's just trying to tell him it's okay, but I think Tenma at this point that's not what he's thinking about. And he's like, and that little smile that he gives, that like tired smile, is almost like he's saying, I appreciate that. I'm glad y'all are here for me, but I'm on a mission for, as my dogs run into White Raccoon, I'm on a mission to do this for my own agenda. It's like, ah! So yeah. And so then that's when he starts questioning. That's when he starts questioning and thinking about everything Tenma said and the look, and realizing for the first time it clicked to him. He's like, oh, Tenma had a gun. Why did Tenma have a gun? And that's when it hits him, right? And he's like, that's when he says, you remind me of Richard. And it all starts to make sense. And that's when Rudy calls him, and he's on his way because he's worried about Tenma. Something's wrong. And that's when Dieter's left. And God, I just feel so bad for Dieter because Dieter knows. He's like, he's going to go do it. Like, Dieter knew. I'm sure even if he spoke up, it didn't stop him. But Dieter, no one needs to make Dieter cry. He's like, he's gonna do it. And then, of course, like, he's like, you need to stop him. Mr. Reichwein, please stop him. And he's like, Tenma, he's going to become a murderer. I'm like, Tenma, if you could see the tears you're causing Dieter, you need to stop. No. Makes me so sad. Makes me so sad. Ugh. I know, my dogs are like, I'm so sad. Okay. Then we have Lunge showing up. I'd recognize that cheesy blue and yellow tie any day, right? I just feel like Gillen is like, God, I hate my job. We have this like creepy psycho serial killer that's like, let me tell you how the women sounded when I murdered them. And he's like, I miss the days when I could just have like a more enticing conversation with someone. Gillen's just like, ugh. But that's when Lunge shows up. You could not have told me that Lunge and Rudy were going to have like a conversation together. And what's so fascinating about this is that Lunge, he seems to respect Rudy and his opinions. He finds Rudy's book fascinating about criminal psychology because Lunge is all about, what's cool about this is that it feels like you have Rudy wants to get into the mind of a criminal and Lunge wants to get into the heart of a criminal. You have the mind and the heart. And Rudy wants to know psychologically, mentally, why do criminals do the things that they do? And Tim and Lunge wants to get into the heart of the matter, like what in their heart stirs them to do these things. Like, and that kind of ties into their arguments in this debate they have with each other. Whereas Gillen is like, think of this logically. Think of this logically. How does this make sense? And all of the evidence is pointing that Johan did. He like writes a whole freaking report about it. He's like, here's my thesis. All the evidence mapped out. But Lunge, surprisingly, is very pathos driven, which does not bode well. I'm going to just put this out here. It does not bode well. He is driven by pathos and he's driven by his emotional drive to the truth. That is very dangerous and very bad if he's going to meet Johan. I'm just going to call it right now. I am worried as hell that he's going to meet Johan. Because here's my thing. At first, in the episode, the reaction, I was like, oh, good. If Lunge meets Johan, he will know that he's real. He will know that Tenma's innocent. We're right as rain. No, that is not good. Because we established in this debate that Rudy is in the sane route where he's like, let's look at this logically, look at X, Y, and Z, see that no, Tenma probably did not commit these murders. We don't know for sure yet, but there's clear evidence that there could be a possibility that Johan did it. So we need to investigate that possibility and come to the right conclusions before we condemn Tenma. Lunge wants to convince himself that he's right, and Gillen kind of gets to the heart of the matter in this. My fear is that if Lunge meets Johan knowing, because Johan clearly has some kind of intuition about all this, right? Johan, maybe he's like Reichwein and he can see somebody in an instant and know how their mentality works and just piece it all together. Maybe he's just like a savant as far as that goes. But my fear is that he's going to meet Lunge and Johan's going to be like, oh, this is how you are. Oh, well, what if I told you the things you want to hear about Tenma, and I make you think that I am as innocent as a newborn babe, and here's why you should go after Tenma. Like, I'm afraid that Johan is going to play Lunge like a fiddle and say all the things that Lunge wants to hear, because we've seen with Schubert when they went to the damn forest, where he just pulled the apple out of thin air and he just lied to Schubert, but he was so convincing in the lie that you almost believed in the fantasy, right? And so then Schubert was like, oh yes, look, Johan is so good, look at him. Like, that's all I wanted to hear. I'm afraid that Lunge is going to meet Johan in the forest, and Johan is going to tell Lunge everything he wants to hear, and he's going to give him the apple, and Lunge is going to be like, yoink, thanks. I'm terrified about it. Because I feel like Lunge is just the right type of person that Johan would be easily able to manipulate. I don't know, but I don't get good vibes. But anyway, I'll get back to this debate between the two of them. So yeah, he says a summary of abnormal criminal psychology. And I think that Lunge points out a lot of his like eccentricities in this discussion that Gillen's like, because he has a very specific photographic memory, right? He has a very specific photographic memory that allows him to remember like insane details. Like he remembered the exact chapter and page numbers of the section of a book that he read from Rudy who knows how long ago and what stuck with him. Like he remembered that specifically, right? I'm sure as he was reading it, he was typing it out, like doing that. Like he remembered that so flawlessly, and Rudy's like, And the funny thing is that Lunge is so eccentric and weird and has all of these like insane qualities about him that make him like out of the box. Rudy is the most fundamental square person ever. He's like just the most straight-laced individual. Rudy is the most bland, straight-laced person you'll ever meet. And Lunge is the most eccentric person you'll ever meet in this profession. So it's so fascinating to see the two of them who are so different meet and talk with each other about Tenma. It's so fascinating. And Rudy just being like, okay. Like, because Rudy has spent every day talking with criminals who are weird, like Lunge. So he's probably just sitting there like, okay. All right, well, how do I deal with this, right? I've had years of working with some crazy people, so you seem like you're in the same boat. That's the crazy thing. Lunge is just one tick away from doing something crazy, right? Lunge has the monster inside of him as well. He's like told people outright. He's manipulated people. I'm so afraid of him meeting Johan. I'm so afraid of him meeting Johan. Because he was like willing to like get in a car with Tenma and nearly run him off the road to try to prove that he was a killer. He was going to shoot Tenma if he didn't confess. Like Lunge is one step away from off the cliff, right? And I think Rudy kind of maybe realizes that. But what separates Lunge from the other criminals we've seen in this series is Lunge has a place of authority that he can mess with. Lunge has ties to the police. He has an authority that these other criminals have not had. And that makes him even more dangerous. Like, Johan's worked with the police and gotten them under his thumb before. Mueller and Mussen, who's to say he couldn't do that with Lunge? I'm terrified. I need to watch ahead. Because I'm so terrified. And he's like, I'm honored you read it so thoroughly. And he said, my method of investigation is to dive into a criminal's heart. Again, Lunge does the heart, Gillen does the mind, right? And walk through what he would think and do. Like he says, okay, I look at the connotation of, okay, what do I do? And then Gillen more looks at the denotation of what did they actually do? What was the methods behind the madness? Lunge's like, what was the thinking involved with it? What was the heart? He's like, you have experience. He's like, oh, I'd love to talk to you. We don't have a lot of free time right now. So let's just talk about your relationship with Reichwein. Lunge has done all his research. What's so insane too is that we've not seen Lunge for a while, like we've not seen Tenma for a while. And Lunge's been doing his research. He's been slowly connecting the dots as we go. He's just been doing it off screen where we couldn't see it. And we're like, oh. So he's been connecting the dots about Reichwein, connected to Gillen, and Gillen's connection to Tenma. He's been putting everything together, right? He's seen all the pieces that we've seen. He doesn't mention Richard, so I don't know how much he knows about Richard. And then Gillen, he's like, you've been in Munich, have you? And he's like, where is Tenma? Where do you think? And so they get in this discussion about the classified ad. And what's kind of scary is that Lunge is like, from May 1st to May 22nd, you printed the 3-line ad in the newspaper 3 times. Like, Lunge has realized Tim has not gotten in But what's so fascinating is he's like, from that deduction of saying you've printed the line in the paper 3 weeks in a row, that would logically make Lunge know that he's not been in contact with Tenma. Why would he keep repeating the same classified line 3 times if he got in contact with him? So Lunge knows that Gillen has not been in contact with Tenma, but then he's like, where's Tenma? And I'm like, you know he doesn't know, but why are you pushing him? Because he's so fixated on his own beliefs about this. And so then he says, well, it's so weird to believe that you guys would be cheating back in college. And Lunge is drawing his own conclusions about this whole thing. And because Gillen's like, well, we weren't really friends in college. There was a whole episode devoted to it, but we don't have time to go into that. But he's like, we weren't friends in college. Technically only cheated once. And Tenma only cheated once, or so we know. He's like, so I like that Gillen's like, you actually don't have the proof to say the things that you're saying, but you're going with your gut intuition. That's kind of, there's a difference there. But then Lunge's like, well, what about you helping him to escape from the police? And Gillen's like, you have no evidence of that. Even though he's right on the money. And he's like, Dr. Tenma is innocent. And Lunge's like, oh, like he makes that sound like, oh, how do you know? And then that's when Gillen goes into being like, I want you to listen with an open mind. Like Gillen, just like Lunge's been piecing together all the dots, Gillen has been psychologically evaluating Lunge sitting there being like, okay, I can put a little note on you to tell how you actually are in this. Let's talk about that. So he's like, I want you to listen with an open mind because he doesn't believe that Lunge is being open-minded, right? That's why he says that. He says the 3 murders at the hospital, the director and the 2 other doctors, the murder of the patient in the building, which was Junkers, the murder at Heidelberg, which was the gardener, and the murders of the middle-aged couples. So we had at least 5 individual murders and then several couples tied to this. My opinion, as an expert, he just takes his title and just throws it on the table. He's like, as an expert in criminal psychology, as you just dubbed me when we first came in here to have this conversation, is from my face-to-face meeting with Tenma. I can deduce that he is not the killer. He's like, no. And Lunge's like, I see. like Lunge's just like, okay, you're just flaunting that. Where is he now? And Gillen's like, he's gone somewhere. I love that Gillen's like, have you not been paying attention? I don't know where he's at. He's like, I'm assuming he's in Munich. He's gone somewhere. Why is he running? And Gillen's like, if he's innocent, why is he running? And so then we get into this complicated discussion here because Lunge's like, well, fine. If he's innocent, then why is he running away? Why does he keep running from me if he's not guilty? And the complicated thing is that Gillen knows that Tenma is innocent, but he knows Tenma's not running. He's not running away from the crime. He's running towards it. He's like, but he can't tell Lunge that. He can't say, well, Tenma's about to go kill a man. He's on a mission to kill a man, so that's why he can't be caught yet. But that will just make Tenma completely suspicious and then make Gillen an accomplice. So he can't say anything. And it's so bonkers that you're just like sitting here internally screaming, why did he leave without telling you? You're his friend, right? And Gillen's like, damn it. We just talked about this. Gillen's like, we just talked about this. He's like, I can't admit it. Ugh. And then he's like, I have proof he's not the killer. And that's when he brings out the manuscript, right? He brings out the manuscript. He's like, all the cases information have been gathered and analyzed here. And it's like the personalism of Johan Liebert, who's 20 years old. Yep. And so then, like, I like that Lunge looks through the whole thing and he's like, yep, the death of this. He like brings it all together. The real killer is this man, Johan Liebert. And he like takes all the typing down. He says, I understand quite well, but I find it useless. Oh my God. And you're just like, I just gave you the ding. Ah! I love the Gillen's like, are you freaking serious? I spent months on that. It's so frustrating. It's impossible to prove all these things are related. I'm like, but you are making so many leaps yourself. So you can just see Gillen's frustration because he's like, wait a minute. He's like, you say none of this is related, but you're making all these assumptions about Tenma. You could just see Gillen's frustration where he's like, excuse me, because he knew the fact best, Tenma left. It's like, that's such a, no, that's not the reason. But you can see where Lunge's getting that thought. And Gillen's face of disappointment is all of us. Gillen just looking at him like, are you freaking serious? Like just that look of disappointment as soon as Lunge's like, well, he just knew that this was all hokum. So that's the reason why he's running. And Gillen's like, I hate you. His face is all of us. He says, as I'm wrong, am I wrong? And Gillen is just like, how do I phrase this? What angle do I tack this now? Okay. He says, those hand movements. I like that Gillen thinks for a minute. And Gillen is like, okay, what do I say? How do I approach this? Because there has to be a way to address the situation. Okay, what can I do? Let's go from here. And Lunge's like, I like that Lunge kind of blinks, like he didn't expect it to go that direction. Like he does the meme where he's like does the blinking man, where he goes, yes. He says, don't pay any, he's always said, don't pay any attention to it, because it's something he's self-conscious of, but it's a mechanism, right? But he says, don't pay any attention to that. It's something I use to help me remember. And Gillen says, well, a psychologist like me would say it's a physical representation of the uncertainty in your heart. Which is so fascinating, because Lunge has always been about the heart of why people do things. And Gillen says that the typing is a represents his uncertainty. Like he is trying to solidify what is told to him through these hand movements. Like that is a mechanism he does to make himself feel more confident. He's like, I'm the same. And that's when Gillen says, I have the same uncertainty in my heart. He says, but instead of using my hands, I use the cassette recorder. Because the cassette recorder is a way of eliminating subjectivity. If I have it documented through the cassette recorder, it must be true. And I can't doubt myself if I have this physical proof. He's like, if I can have proof of what they said, I can't doubt what I think. And he's like, if you can record with your hands and say to everyone that it's your memory, then it can't be doubted, right? I love it. He says, I play with the cassette recorder. And he tells Lunge, he says, the information recorded in your hand movements is by nature subjective. It's not he's like, the information is subjective, but you've been doing this all this time to erase that subjectivity by claiming that it gives your hand's memories are correct. Just like I have in my hand this cassette recorder that proves everything I hear is accurate, your hand movements, if it records it into your memory, it must be true. It can't be viewed as subjective. Your decisions were never mistaken. He says, what are your hobbies? What do you do in your spare time? Do you only live for your work? Yes, we know that. Have you ever made a mistake? Are you horribly afraid of making a mistake? To you, Tenma must be the killer, because if not, your identity is destroyed. And Lunge is just like, He's just like, he doesn't say a word, doesn't deny it, doesn't say a thing. He's like, at this point, Tenma has to be the killer, because if not, that means you made a mistake. And if your life is connected, to your work, then making a mistake will shatter your identity. And you don't want that to happen, because underneath it all, then what are you left with, right? Then what are you left with? And I can kind of relate to Lunge in this moment. I can, because there's another series I've been reviewing, and there's a character that I instantly disliked in the series, and I've personally steeled myself and resolved myself that nope, I don't like that character, and I don't like the things that they do, and here's X, Y, and Z, and this is why. And honestly, watching this episode, it kind of makes me realize I'm a little bit like Lunge in that I don't want to admit. I say that I'll be open-minded. I say that I'll admit when I'm wrong, but it's hard. It's hard if you're someone that wants to. And I think part of it is that when I do reactions like this and discussions, I say I'll admit when I'm wrong, but it's hard because you sit here and you put out your opinions about things, and then when they're challenged, the human reaction is to be like, no, I'm going to just lean even further into my beliefs, right? And you kind of become like Lunge. You lean further into those beliefs, because if you admit that you're wrong, it's true in anything, not just my reactions, not just anything, but as humans, when we decide something, it becomes kind of tied to our identity, our views, our morals, who we are. And so if we change, I think there's a difference between us naturally changing our opinions along the way and being forced to change those opinions, right? I've kind of said this in the reactions for that series. I'm like, I kind of want to be left alone from the comments to deduce my own opinions about that character. And I think it's because if we ourselves can look at something and we ourselves realize that we're wrong naturally, I think it's easier, because then you can slowly mold your identity and say, okay, yes, I realize I was wrong about this, and I want to apologize and say, hey, I was wrong about this character. I've been doing that in other series too, not just the one that I'm staunchly against that one character, but there's been other series that I've watched where I started out with a very strong opinion about a character, and as I went on and learned more about them, I was like, oh, you know what? Maybe I was mistaken. But what I think it's problematic is when people tell you you're wrong and that you have to change your opinions. It's very human to reflexively go, no, and withdraw into yourself and say, oh, I don't want to do that. No. So I feel like that's the case with Lunge. If Lunge is able to form his own opinions and change them, it's one thing. But if somebody comes out and says you're wrong, and you're someone that's very pathos driven, you're suddenly like, well, don't tell me what to do. And you just get so flustered, right? And so I do feel kind of like Lunge in this moment. I get where he's coming from. He doesn't want to have that identity shattered, right? But he is wrong. You know? He says, look at the truth. This is a photo of Johan Liebert. And Lunge looks at it. Can you prove that everything is just Tenma's lies? And so this is, I think, what gets Lunge, is that there is physical evidence out there that could be in the way. And I was like, I wouldn't have let him run off with that photo. Because I think at this point, Lunge's like, well, shit, I need to get to the bottom of this, because Johan, now that I know Johan is in fact a physical person, he is a link in the chain that could throw off everything. So I'm like, is Lunge going to try to kill Johan to get him out of the way so he can still convince convict Tenma of all the murders? I don't know. But him saying, can you prove that everything is just Tenma's lies? He's like, Johan's existence is keeping him from convicting Tenma. So that's the crazy thing. It could either go one of two ways. If Lunge meets Johan, there's a number of things that could happen. But if Lunge meets Johan, it could go one of two ways. Where Lunge is persuaded by Johan and dives further into convicting Tenma. Or he could decide that Johan is a threat to him convicting Tenma and decide to get rid of him. Because I don't think that Lunge's changed his mind. I think the huge mistake that he thinks he's made, that the joke like where he's like, I've made a huge mistake. I think that the mistake is that he's left a piece of evidence on the table that would allow Tenma to go away scot-free. And at this point, he's like, no, I want to convict Tenma no matter what. The fact that Johan exists is a problem. So I'm like, I don't know. But then if Tenma finds out that Lunge is trying to kill Johan, he's going to feel even more responsible, being like, what, why? So what does he say there? Going back there, just looking at the photo and saying, where is this young man now? Like, he's just like, so where is this piece of the puzzle I need to go meet? He's a student at Munich University. And he asks for the photo, and then he says, I've made a terrible mistake. Where is Dr. Tenma now? And he says, in Munich. And he calls the Munich police, saying this is a request for emergency police deployment. Tenma is in Munich. And I'm like, no! So yeah, either he's going to try to catch Tenma in the act of killing Johan to convict Tenma, or he's going to try to find Johan first, get rid of Johan so that Tenma can be convicted, or he's going to talk to Johan and get persuaded and join Johan's forces. I don't know at this point. I don't know what's going to happen. But all we do know is that Tenma, he's going after the sniper rifle, and he puts the advance in to get it. And the guy's like, are you sure you want to use this sniper rifle? I'm going to the trouble of getting this for you. Are you going to be able to handle it? Now, the thing is, I am assuming that the reception party for next week's Munich Electronics Fair was held today by the Chamber of Commerce. I am assuming that Dieter has been sent to stay with Reichwein while he's in the apartment gearing up for this assassination. I'm assuming that's what's happening. But then the question is, what is Reichwein going to do in the meantime? But okay, so they had a reception party. Next week they're having an electronics fair, which is conveniently the same time he's getting the sniper rifle. So you got a week. You've got a week to stop Tenma. That seems like enough, right? You know where he's staying at. That seems like enough. You can stop him. What are we going to do? That's being held by the Chamber of Commerce, and that everybody was there. And Tenma is trying to physically get into shape. He's like, Schubert was there, and then he sees Johan. And that just steals his resolve even more. So he's going to try to assassinate Johan at this electronics fair. Okay. All right. I mean, they've got a week. They've got a week to try, Lunge is going to try to use that week to narrow down where Tenma is and arrest him to stop him from what he thinks is going on. He's going to try to do that. And then Reichwein and Gillen are probably going to try to find Tenma and be like, hey, Gillen's going to be like, Lunge is going to be looking for you. Be careful. And maybe, but does Gillen even know how much Lunge does Gillen know about Lunge's tussle with Tenma before? He doesn't. So, and then Reichwein, is he going to try to convince Tenma not to do anything? And what is Johan doing during all this? Yeah, I am definitely going to read your comments down below. Don't worry, I'm going to read your comments. I'll get to them in these episodes as I get to them, but I don't think I can stop now. I think I've got to keep watching to figure out what happens next. So, but in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe. Take care. And yeah, I will be back very soon with more Monster. Bye.